It's Robbie Williams and Better Man on Saturday Breakfast at 14 minutes past 7. Now, the RSPCA is celebrating 120 years in Western Australia this year, believe it or not. Lynne Bradshaw is the president of the RSPCA here in WA, also president of the RSPCA on a national level as well. And we thought, with it being 120 years, it'd be interesting to see how far, or not how far, we've come in this country and in this state in particular with respect to our animal welfare. Good morning, Lynne.
Good morning, James. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. You obviously had a lot on your plate last year with the live export issue. Did that raise very much sort of the RSPCA profile and your sort of stance on certain issues much more than ever before?
Well, it really did, yes. I mean, the public uptake of that issue has been phenomenal. And, of course, certain changes and processes towards greater change have been put in place.
It was remarkable the speed with which things turned on that one, because there we have a TV show going out on a Monday, and, a couple of days later, new changes are in place.
Well, I think it was probably the first time that the public became aware of some of the things that happen, particularly from the animal welfare perspective, and it's something perhaps that's been bubbling under the surface, if you like, so the average person in the street hadn't necessarily been aware of certain practices.
So do you think that is the key to everything that the RSPCA does? It's all to do with awareness, and some of the things that go on that the public are totally blind to?
Well, the main role for the RSPCA is, of course, to be an education vehicle for the public. And we focus on welfare from the perspective that we do agree that animals should be used for food and fibre. So we're not against farming, and, we're not trying to stop people eating meat. But when people are consuming animals, and animals are being raised for that purpose, we're saying they really need to be raised humanely. So the conditions need to be such that the animal can exhibit its natural behaviours, and it leads a reasonable life up to the point of slaughter.
Are you comfortable now with the way that live export's conducted? Are you confident that the changes that were theoretically made are now in place?
Well, not really. Our whole stance from an RSPCA perspective, and again I just reinforce it's based on welfare for the animal, we'd like to see live export phased out and transition to a carcass-only trade. And the reason being that whatever we do at this end, and whatever we do to try and get things right here, and certainly the producers are trying to do that, we have no control at what happens at the other end in the importing country. And because of that, how can we say that things are secure for the animals? So, yes, the government has put in certain measures. We're trying to get what is called a closed-loop system, so that the animals can be tracked and they can be kept within a system that there is certain controls over. But, the very thing that's missing at the moment is that most of the animals are not pre-stunned before they're slaughtered. And that's one of the main factors, and I don't think the public really understand that.
How did you react to the reaction from some of the farmers who turned around and said, after all these years, our welfare is at stake now, that we may not be able to carry on farming if this is all brought through?
Yes, and that was a fairly horrific time, and I can certainly understand it from their point of view. And when the controls were put in place, there was a sort of temporary ceasing of the trade. That wasn't necessarily what the RSPCA were asking for. We were asking for something to be done and give time for adjustment. And I guess that's why the farmers were accusing the government of a knee-jerk reaction. But in the end, something did happen, and there's more at stake for the producers than just necessarily what the RSPCA is saying, because there is a risk in the importing countries that things could change, or they could cut their quotas as they have in Indonesia. So it's a risky business, if you like.
How do you feel in terms of campaigning? Because obviously you can't be campaigning on a different issue every week. You've got to be looking at what your focus is, and also be aware that the public may not want you to interfere all the time, because, you know,
Yes.
there's an element of status quo in certain respects.
Yes, there is, but I think that where there are areas of concern, and because the RSPCA represents mainstream community thinking, these are the questions that are posed to us. RSPCA, what's happening here? What's your stance on this? How should we, you know, what should we be doing as consumers? What difference can we make out there to the life of animals in, say, intensive systems? And, you know, mostly the average person in the street might relate to the RSPCA as dogs and cats and what we call companion animals, and there's certainly great issues there. But in terms of what we call the more hidden activities, so the animals that are raised for our food consumption, it's very, very important that we do inform the public as to what they can do to make a difference.
Yeah. Lynne Bradshaw is with us. She's the president of the RSPCA, not only here in WA, but on a national level as well. Covert reporting of it, the hidden camera trick is a very good way of getting that information out there. Do you think that is the right way, the only way that sometimes some of these practices can become public?
Well, I think it has a shock factor, and I guess it's driven by a sheer frustration that some of the changes that need to be in place and historically needed to be in place haven't been put in, some things that are very easy to do.
The danger is, though, that people say it's being doctored, it's not legitimate.
Yeah, and obviously our view is that really that's not the way to go. What we need to do is have voluntary compliance with standards and with codes of practice, and we really have to instill the thought that, you know, you can do everything voluntarily. You don't have to have people skulking around in the dark with a video camera. Personally, I don't believe that is the way to go, and I think, however, we may see more of that. That definitely is not the RSPCA role.
It's a last resort.
We do not participate in that, and it is not our role.
Okay, I want to ask you about free range, because free range is a confusing issue for the public. We see, for example, on labels that's free-range chicken, and yet, you know, there is a big difference between, say, this producer of free-range chicken and this producer of free-range chicken. What's your take on this? Because I know now that there is an RSPCA label that effectively says you're happy with the way that is conducted.
So the RSPCA accredited food system is growing in momentum, and it's a system that the producers subscribe to and they pay to subscribe to, the money of which then goes back into supporting the process to accredit and prove that on the quality assurance program twice a year. But the whole problem with some of these issues is the labelling and what we call the truth in labelling. It applies to some of the animal products, but it also applies to food in general. So if you're going to the supermarkets, it's very confusing sometimes.
Very.
So it's best to look for something that actually is endorsed. The RSPCA endorsement, if you see the label, you know that things are up to the right standard.
Okay. So you also have the RSPCA label on some barn eggs, don't you, for example? So again, that's confusing for the public, because the assumption would be that that isn't the free range way to go.
If the animal's in a barn, it's not free range. Yes, well, basically, free range, if you like, is not necessarily the right way to go if the animals aren't protected from predators. So there's different degrees. So the barn laid is really the RSPCA's preferred option. In other words, there's a large barn. The animals are free to exhibit the normal behaviour. They can perch. They're living in smaller numbers, etc. And the free range component of that is then they're able to go outside rather than live their whole life in a paddock, so to speak.
How many egg farms have actually got RSPCA approval in Western Australia? And looking at the comparison between us, for example, and the rest of the country, are we lagging behind?
Well, we're pretty well behind, James, you know, in WA.
On that or on everything?
I'd say on most things, yes. Purely because from a population basis, you know, if there's more demand, the eastern states have got more numbers. They're probably, if you like, further down the track with some of these changes. And so there aren't as many accredited systems here. But at the moment we have accredited pork, accredited chicken, turkey and eggs.
Right.
Perhaps not in the same numbers of producers, that they have in the eastern states.
But is that because, you know, some of the farms haven't even approached you to ask you to even come around?
Well, we also have to be able to manage it. So as it's growing, we have to put more and more people on to be able to run a system. Obviously, once you start an accredited process to a very high standard.
How's it funded?
We raise the money for that. So everything that we do is raised from community input.
So the likes of the Million
Paws Walk,
some of that money would go towards that?
That's totally the sort of thing. So in other words, the RSPCA coffers, if you like, are filled from donations from the public, from activities for raising money. Okay. And it's with that we actually manage to do these things. So if you like, therefore, we're recycling, you could say, the community input to set the benchmark to then say to them, look, you have the choice here, consumer. It's you that's going to make the difference.
Do you think if the public actually saw the way some of our animals were farmed for meat, they would be shocked?
I think certainly they would be shocked, but there's different degrees of shock in that. I think there's generations now coming forward who've never really had any engagement with farming at all, if you like. They're not exposed to it. We're seeing youngsters now that come through and you know, where does your milk come from? Where do your eggs come from? Well, they come from the supermarket. There's a disconnect between what they're eating and where their food is coming from. And it's that connection that we're trying to work to say, well, look, think about this. Something ends up on the supermarket shelf. Please question, you know, how it's getting there, how it's being produced, and what the conditions are for that animal. Let
me ask you finally about the ever-growing population, not only here in Australia but in the world. There is a demand for more food, which often means some of the producers look at intensive farming as the only way to go. Is there any way that we can maybe cater for our ever-growing population and do it the right way?
Well, I think that's exactly the key to it. Food security is something that all governments are concerned about, and it's a growing issue. But we can, if you like, call it intensively farm animals, but do it humanely. So we can do it differently. It's a change of mindset. It's not that we're saying, well, you know, stop doing this and, you know, we'll all go back to nature. Although it would be tempting, it's just not possible. So we need volume, if you like, in the production process. But it can be done by taking the welfare component into account. And, you know, when it comes to it, it really doesn't cost anything extra to do that. It's a transition from one method to another.
Do you think it'll come from public pressure then, these changes?
It will definitely come from public pressure. And so if you like, in the case of eggs at the moment, I mean, we've got Father's Day coming up tomorrow. I mean, I'd ask the public to, if you're having a breakfast with your dad or a lunch, if you're eating eggs at all, you know, find out where have those eggs come from. Are they accredited eggs? Are they free-range eggs? Or on your box, does it say cage eggs? So we're asking them, choose cage-free eggs, which is either barn-laid or free-range, and really make a difference. Tell your friends, tell everybody that you know to actually question that.
Then they will have to change their ways. It's happened in the UK. I mean, I don't think you can buy cage eggs anymore, can you?
Well, you can in small, but the cage eggs over there are what they call enriched cages, but which I won't go into today. But it's dying out. You know, it's just not happening. So you just wouldn't dream of going out and deliberately buying cage eggs. It's just that people don't know they're doing that. They'll pick up the box of eggs. So look.
And normally the cheapest. You know, when budgets are tight, you can understand that, can't you?
Well, you can understand it, but also then maybe what we have to do is think that that last-minute purchase, or, you know, we're going to buy something, a magazine or whatever, maybe what we could do is think, okay, this month I won't do that. I'll put that difference in price, which is only a couple of dollars, about 20 cents an egg, into humane food.
Lynne, it's a topic that we could spend a long time talking about, but it's really good to have you in the studio to celebrate 120 years here in Western Australia, the RSPCA, and to hear about some of the issues and to see how far those changes are travelling. And it looks to me, you know, the overriding consensus I hear from you is that, you know, the way things can change is through public pressure, and that will definitely happen the more people become aware.
Well, I think that the public can really make a difference, so I guess I'm throwing that challenge down to them. And the farmers and the producers will give us what we want.
Yes.
It's just that we need to ask a little bit more strongly.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Lynne Bradshaw, the president of the RSPCA, 28 minutes past 7.
International Rugby Union returns to Perth on